What is shaking, gangs? Jeff Bastine here, and it is officially 2020. Not only a whole new year, but like a whole new decade. How crazy is that? So what better time than to finally start building yourself a home studio? So I'm going to break this out into two different videos. So this week we're going to go over 10 items that you're going to have regardless of whether you're just a singer-songwriter or whether you're trying to build a studio to record bands. And then next week we're going to go over another 10 items that, depending on your studio setup and your needs, some people will need some of the stuff on the list, others won't need any of it. Alright, so let's get cracking into the list. Alright, so with my cat purring away behind me, the first thing we're going to need is a computer. Now, with it being 2020, nowadays, most any computer you pick up off the shelf is going to do you well for a little while. So it doesn't matter whether you decide you want to go with a Mac or you want to use a PC. There's two areas you're going to want to make sure of before you make a computer purchase. First area is going to be RAM. Now, most computers nowadays are usually shipping with 8 to maybe 16 gig of RAM already built into the computer, which for a lot of you might be more than enough. But if you're somebody who's going to be using a lot of sample libraries and things like that, when you load them up into your DAW, those get loaded into RAM. So if you're using a lot of software instruments, those can eat up your RAM really quickly. So you always want to try and get as much RAM as you can afford. I have 24 gig in my iMac. I've never come close to running out of RAM. Next consideration is going to be hard drives. So we basically have two flavors of hard drives nowadays. We have solid state drives, which are expensive but blazingly fast. And we also have regular mechanical hard drives, which we've had for forever. They're still fast, a lot cheaper, and you can get a lot more storage without having to spend, I don't know, like 3 mortgage payments. But if you're going to go with mechanical hard drives, you want to make sure that your hard drive speed is at least 7,200 RPM. A lot of laptops and stuff will come with hard drives that are only 5,400 RPM to cut the cost down, but don't get one of these.
You're wasting your time!
They are just too slow for music production. Alright, so now that you've got a computer, well, now you need to get your guitars, drums, whatever you're trying to record from the real world into the computer. So how do we do that? Well, that would be where an audio interface comes into play. So what an audio interface does is it allows you to get your audio in and out of your computer. Now you can get these as small as little one-channel interfaces, meaning they have one input, all the way up to, well, a lot of inputs. So if we take a look at the front of this one, for example, now they're all pretty well the same. You're going to have an input here that you can plug a microphone or a guitar into. Then you're going to have a gain knob so you can adjust the level going into the computer. Some of them will have a little switch on some of the channels so you can switch between a microphone and a guitar. The signal level coming out of a guitar or bass is really low, so that's why a lot of these will have this little switch on some of the channels. There'll be a button somewhere to turn phantom power on and off for your microphones if they need it, like condenser mics. They're all going to have a headphone output and usually a separate volume for the headphone level, and then a main volume to control the level going to your monitors. So now if we flip to the back, you'll see on this one's pretty simple, but we're going to have our USB connection over to our computer. These are going to be the outputs that go to our speakers or our monitors. That's just for a Kensington lock. Some will have that in case you want to lock it down. And then if you get into bigger units, they'll have a lot of extra outputs on the back. There might be connections for ADAT, word clock. It just depends on the unit. So now if we break it down to just general signal flow, this is how these things work. So you plug a guitar or something into the front of it. Then this thing's going to convert that analog signal into a digital signal. That's your A to D converter. Then it's going to send that signal out the USB cable into the computer. Then through that same cable, it's going to come back into the audio interface. It's going to hit your D to A converters, your digital to analog converters, and then it's going to send that audio signal out to your speakers. And that's pretty much the gist of an audio interface. But where does all this audio go and come from? Well, that's where a DAW comes in, which stands for Digital Audio Workstation. Now, there are a ton of DAWs out there. There's Logic, GarageBand, Pro Tools, Cubase, Ableton Live. I could go on for days. Now, some DAWs may have features that other DAWs don't have, but all of them at their very core are basically this. If you went into a big fancy studio, into the control room, and they have a big giant console laid out, they have racks full of effects, they have tape machines set up in the room. Now take all that stuff in the control room and bundle it up into a piece of software, and that's your DAW in a nutshell. Alright, so now you're going to need to be able to hear the music you're trying to make. So that's going to bring us into monitors and headphones. Now these are two very personal and loaded subjects, so we're just going to graze over them quickly. So at some point you're going to need some proper studio monitors, and potentially a subwoofer. Prices can range from not a whole ton of money to a second mortgage. But when you're out shopping for monitors and headphones, bring some music that you're really familiar with. That way as you're checking out different speakers and all that stuff, you have a point of reference. That way you can start narrowing down which headphones and speakers sound best to your ears. Monitors themselves will have different types of features. There's also passive monitors and active monitors. So if you have passive monitors, what that means is it's basically just a regular speaker, and you're going to need some sort of power amp to power those speakers. But if you have active monitors, then the power amp section is already built into the speaker enclosure. Now with active monitors, on the back of them, you're usually going to have a volume knob, your inputs, and generally there's some type of EQ setting switches on the back that you can adjust to help set them in your room. We'll go over all that stuff in another video. Another thing with monitors is you're going to want to make sure that you have some good stands to put them on. Generally, you don't want to put them on your desk. You want to decouple the speakers from the desk. That way you're not getting resonance and sounds vibrating through the desk. You also want to make sure that your monitors are placed at ear level. So again, when shopping for stands, either kind of pre-measure what you need or buy a set of adjustable stands where you can adjust the height of them. Now you're going to need headphones regardless, but if monitors are currently out of your budget, I'm going to give you an inexpensive way to get started. Now some people might grill me on this, but you can actually mix with headphones. You just need a little assistance. So the issue when mixing on headphones is you have a left and a right, and that's it. Versus speakers in a room, you have a left and a right, but all the sounds are kind of meeting in the middle. You have your phantom center, all that sort of stuff. But you don't really get that with headphones. But there's plugins out there that you can use that through crazy technology make your headphones sound like you're actually listening to a pair of speakers. There's SonarWorks, there's Waves NX, and most recently, Waves came out with Abbey Road Studio 3, which I did do a video on. I'll put the link below. And oh my god, when that thing came out, I was just like, take my money. So if you grabbed yourself a nice pair of cans like the Sennheiser 280s, and then one of these plugins for the headphones, you're out like a couple $100 and you're basically ready to go. Versus getting a set of monitors, maybe a sub and stands and all the stuff, you might be out $1,000 or more. Now, you definitely want to get monitors at some point, but again, if you're just starting out and you don't have the budget right now, a pair of cans and one of these plugins is a great place to get started. Alright, and just before we get into the last two sections, this is my question of the week for you guys. So out of these 10 items that we're going over today, are there any that you guys want to see a more in-depth video on? If so, just let me know in the comment section down below. Alright, so moving on to microphones, we basically have 4 flavors of microphones. We have your large diaphragm condensers, small diaphragm condensers. Remember on the audio interface I showed you about the phantom power button? Those two are going to require phantom power. You have your dynamic microphones, and then you also have ribbon mics, which I don't actually own a ribbon mic. Seriously, dude? Now you can almost look at microphones like crayons. You can have just one green crayon and do a hell of a lot with it, but having more crayons just gives you more variety and more options. Now being 2020, we're pretty lucky that you can get a lot of inexpensive microphones that are really good nowadays. Now don't get me wrong, you know, having a $4,000 Neumann U87 would be great, but you don't necessarily need it. Now to go along with your microphones, you're going to need mic stands because, well, they haven't quite invented hover mics yet. Now, mic stands are pretty straightforward. I mean, you can either get them straight or in a boom configuration, meaning at the top half of the mic, you can angle the microphone and better position it wherever you need to position it. Now, if you're a singer, another thing you're going to need is the trusty old pop screen. So if we look at the front of a pop screen, it's basically a grill with a whole bunch of holes through it. So why is this important if you're singing? Because if you're singing words that start with a P, the force of that air coming out of your mouth and hitting the microphone isn't good, and it doesn't sound good. We would call that a plosive. But what a pop screen does is as you're singing those words with a P and those plosives, it breaks the air up. So instead of that air just coming out of your mouth and hitting the front of the microphone, the screen causes that air to kind of disperse and spread out, so it's not hitting the front of the capsule and the microphone so hard. And now the last thing that you're going to need for your microphones is the trusty XLR cable. Those are the kind of cables that you're going to need in order to plug your microphone into your audio interface. And not much to say on those. It's a cable. So now on to the last item on our shopping list today, a Midi controller. What the hell's a Midi controller? Well, that could be, well, pretty much anything. If you have an electric drum kit, it's going to have a USB port out to plug into your computer. That would make that drum kit a Midi controller. If you have a keyboard, piano, again, probably going to be a MIDI port or a USB out to plug into your computer. That's a MIDI controller. There's MIDI guitars, there's MIDI woodwind instruments. Oh my god, we could go on for days. There's MIDI mixing boards. Literally, days. So when you're in your DAW and you pull up a sample library, be it an orchestra pack or pianos or drums or whatever, you would use a MIDI controller to play these instruments. Or you could use the pencil tool and do it all manually. I don't know why anybody would do that. So yeah, MIDI controllers are another one of those subjects where we're gonna kind of need to do a whole video on. Far too many options and possibilities to try and tackle today. So there's our 10 items for this week. Like I said earlier, next week we're going to tackle the next set of 10 items. Again, next week's list is a mishmash of items everyone will need and items only some of you will need. So don't forget to come back next week and check that one out. If you're new here, don't forget to like and subscribe and share the video out. And on that note, I'm hungry, I want some breakfast. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys next week.